At least 32 Palestinians were killed in Israeli airstrikes across Gaza on Sunday as Benjamin Netanyahu prepares to meet President Trump in Washington to discuss the war.
Thousands of protesters joined a Paris rally with France's Marine Le Pen to protest a court ban preventing her from taking part in the next presidential election.
A ceremony was held in the German city of Weimar to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the Buchenwald concentration camp. At least 32 Palestinians were killed in Israeli airstrikes across Gaza, mostly women and children. Israel resumed the war 3 weeks ago following the breakdown of a fragile ceasefire with Hamas. Daily strikes and ground operations have taken place since, killing more than 1,000 people, according to a UN report. More than 50,500 Palestinians have been killed so far since the start of the war in October 2023, according to the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry. On Sunday, Israeli strikes targeted a tent and a house in Khan Yunis in the south, killing 5 men, 5 women, and 5 children. Another strike on the Jabalia refugee camp in the north killed at least 4 Palestinians. A strike in Gaza City targeted people waiting outside a bakery, killing more than 6 people, of which half were children. The attacks come as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gears up to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump in the White House on Monday. Netanyahu says he'll update the U.S. president on recent developments and discuss next steps of the war.
A few dozen protesters gathered outside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's home, calling for a deal securing the release of all hostages in Jerusalem on Monday. The rally marks a year and a half since Hamas militants attacked southern Israel. One grandmother of a hostage has a message for Netanyahu.
אתה בארצות הברית ואתה צריך שם לשבת עם הנשיא טראמפ ולגמור עסקה שכולם יצאו החוצה הביתה. אנחנו מצפים לזה.
Later on Monday, Netanyahu and Trump are set to meet in Washington, D.C. Last month, Israel broke the ceasefire with Hamas by bombing Gaza after pressuring militants to accept new ceasefire terms, a move backed by the White House. Israel has also halted all food, fuel and aid supplies to Gaza.
The death toll from a Russian strike on the central Ukrainian city of Kryvyi Rih has risen to 18. At least 9 children were among those dead in the attack, with the youngest aged only 3. Ukrainian authorities say the Kremlin targeted a residential neighborhood with a ballistic missile. Moscow says it targeted a restaurant in the city where a meeting between military officers and Western instructors was taking place. At least 72 others were injured in the attack, about half remain in the hospital, 17 of which are still in critical condition. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says doctors are working around the clock to save as many lives as possible. The Ukrainian leader says the Kremlin's continuing attacks highlight their unwillingness to end the war, as he accuses Putin of stalling ceasefire efforts. He called on allies to exert more pressure on Moscow to force them into striking a peace deal and pleaded for more military support to bolster air defenses.
Convicted last week of embezzling public funds and banned from running for office, French far-right politician Marine Le Pen addressed a crowd of her supporters on Sunday in Paris. The National Rally Party leader said she had fought injustice for 30 years and was prepared to continue the fight.
Ils sont pour nous, ils sont pour moi évidemment, une raison supplémentaire de ne rien lâcher. Et que chacun soit rassuré, je ne lâcherai rien. L'humiliation, tout comme la vengeance ou le concept de tableau de chasse judiciaire, tout cela est à l'opposé de l'idée que je me fais de la justice. Tout cela me fait horreur.
Thousands of supporters gathered at Place Vauban near the tomb of Napoleon in Paris for what was billed as a protest, but observers said it had all the markings of a campaign rally. Last Monday, a court convicted Le Pen of embezzling EU funds. She was handed a partially suspended prison sentence and banned from running in elections for 5 years. U.S. President billionaire advisor Elon Musk has said he hopes that the U.S. and Europe can create a very close, stronger partnership and eventually establish a zero-tariff free trade zone. Musk said this in a virtual speech at Italy's ruling far-right Lega Party Congress on Saturday, adding that he had advised U.S. President Donald Trump about a potential free trade zone.
I hope it is agreed that both Europe and the United States should move, ideally, in my view, to a zero-tariff situation, effectively creating a free trade zone between Europe and North America. That would be that's what I hope occurs. And also more freedom of people to move between Europe and North America, if they wish. If they wish to work in Europe or wish to work in America, they should be allowed to do so, in my view.
Musk's comment came after China hit back at the U.S. with 34% tariffs, which caused markets to slide even further by margins not seen since the COVID pandemic. Meanwhile, on Sunday, EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen reiterated the EU's commitment to negotiating with the U.S., while also saying it will defend its interests through proportionate countermeasures if necessary.
Austria has closed 24 small border crossings with Hungary and Slovakia in an effort to prevent foot and mouth disease from entering the country. Slovakia declared an emergency situation on Tuesday after the disease commonly known as FMD was detected on 3 farms. Hungary had its first outbreak of the highly infectious disease in 50 years on Wednesday. The disease, which poses no danger to humans, mostly affects cattle and other cloven-hoofed animals, like swine, sheep, and goats, causing fever and mouth blisters. Outbreaks often lead to trade restrictions and culls of some livestock. Austrian health authorities are conducting rigorous checks at the few open border crossings. Cars and pedestrians crossing on foot have to pass over an epidemic rug to prevent the virus from spreading. Police are also searching vehicles at border points for meat products which are restricted while this emergency persists. Authorities are also preparing contingencies in the case FMD is detected at an Austrian farm.
Russia continues its Black Sea cleanup operation in the Kerch Strait after last December's oil spill from 2 storm-stricken Russian tankers, according to footage released by Russian authorities. The fuel oil spill of at least 3,700 tons happened in mid-December in the strait, which separates Russia and Ukraine's Russian-occupied Crimea. 2 Russian oil tankers were caught in a storm. One broke in half and sank, while the other ran aground and also leaked oil. Russia's Ministry of Emergency Situations reported that more than 418 kilometers of shoreline have been cleared, over 154,000 tons of polluted sand and oil have been collected, and an estimated 913 million euros has been spent on the cleanup. At least 18 people have been killed in torrential rains and flash flooding following deadly tornadoes as storms rage through midwestern and southern U.S. states, including Kentucky and Alabama, as the rain starts to ease in some of the hardest hit areas of Tennessee. Some are still trying to hear from their loved ones.
Came here to check on my dad. He lives right over there by the baseball fields, and ain't really heard nothing from him, and just want to try to make sure he was safe and out of here.
Meanwhile, local media reported that the Ohio River would likely reach on Monday a level of flood only experienced once in the past 28 years. In Arkansas, a 5-year-old boy died after a tree fell on his family's home and trapped him, according to police. Forecasters warned that flooding could persist for days and said that tornadoes are possible in Alabama, Georgia, and Florida.
The 80th anniversary of the liberation of the Buchenwald concentration camp was commemorated with a ceremony in the German city of Weimar. It was attended by the country's former president, Christian Wulff. In a speech at the event, he warned against radicalization and a worldwide shift to the right.
Aufgrund der Verrohung, der Radikalisierung und eines weltweiten Rechtsrucks kann ich mir inzwischen, und das macht mich beklommen, deutlicher vorstellen, wie das damals geschehen konnte. Das ist für mich erschreckend, sodass ich es für zwingend halte, dass die heutigen Generationen ihr Engagement verstärken, für unsere Werte aktiv mit Mut und Haltung einzutreten, um Dämonen des 19. und 20. Jahrhunderts nicht zurückkehren zu lassen.
Wolf also criticized the rise of anti-immigration sentiment championed by the far-right Alternative for Germany party. The former president, who belongs to the Christian Democratic Union, called for active commitment to democracy and the preservation of humanity. The Buchenwald concentration camp was established in 1937. At its peak, the camp and its satellites housed close to 300,000 inmates. More than 55,000 of its prisoners were killed by Nazis or died as a result of hunger, illness, or medical experiments. The camp was liberated on the 11th of April 1945.
Pope Francis made a surprise appearance in St. Peter's Square on Sunday morning during a special Jubilee Mass for the sick and health workers. He was rolled into the square on a wheelchair in his first public appearance at the Vatican since being released from hospital 2 weeks earlier, after a battle with life-threatening pneumonia. In an Angelus prayer read out by Archbishop Rino Fisichella, the pontiff prayed for doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers around the world and wished for peace in places affected by war, as well as more aid for Myanmar and Haiti.